a lot of times these idea of kashrus is sort of casual, because in the end everybody has to eat at least a few times a day. So every single time that I have, it's a certain time of way of indicating, of testing myself. Do I really live up to my morals, to my decisions? Am I really within the framework that I chose for myself? No, it's kashrus is not something that I could just, as I'm going on, I'm choosing my standard. It's something that I have to sit down and I have to decide, is this my standard? One of the greatest things that a person should do for himself, and this can happen on different levels. It could be annually, once a year. It could be once in a period of time. I start a new program. Is really deciding to yourself before, what is my standard?
Hey, I'm Esther, and you are listening to On Your Own, the podcast for Jewish girls living away from home. Each week, we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you confidently navigate life on your own, so you can achieve real growth and independence and take ownership of this foundational stage of your life. For additional resources, tips, and to stay up to date on future episodes, sign up for the On Your Own newsletter, linked below in the description. Looking forward to spending some time with you today. And now, to this week's episode. What role does the mitzvah of kashrus play in our lives as frum Yidden? Because we don't usually think about that growing up. It's something that our parents kind of decide for us. If we want to know if someone's frum or not, like, do they keep kosher? But as girls going on their own, what role does kashrus play in our life as frum Yidden?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. Maybe in a way, kashrus, being that it's something that has to do with food, and food is something that's so dominant in our life. In fact, a lot of people, not just referring kashrus, but a lot of people just eat in such a way that, as I said, not necessarily kosher eaters, that they're not very aware of what they eat. We know, especially in Western civilization, one of the biggest issues people have, or one of the biggest causes for shortening their lives, is just not eating the right way. So I think being that part of being Jewish is not just the idea of once in a while practicing Judaism. In many, many religions, you could be a very faithful whatever you are, as long as, once a week you go to some holy place and maybe you pay up some holy person, and that makes you a God-fearing person, a religious person. Judaism doesn't believe in that. Judaism believes that on a regular Tuesday, Wednesday morning, having cereal and milk, you are able to practice your devotion, an unconditional connection to Hashem, just by a daily action. And there's nothing more casual than eating. As I said, in Western civilization today, they understand that one of the biggest problems is a lack of awareness in eating. You have all these studies, you should be more aware of what you eat, and you should eat this way and that way, and this amount of portions and this amount of meals and this amount of menus and everything. Just because, in one hand, it's such a basic thing, it's such a thing people do subconsciously, not being aware. So there's such a big idea of awareness of eating, not just in general. Now, when it comes to Judaism, as I was saying before, Judaism is not just a bunch of one-time actions. There's so much that has to do with it. So much has to do with it regarding the way we think, the way we talk, and the way we act, the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way we work. And being that, as I was saying before, food is such an essential, basic thing in any type of life, for sure when it's a life that's supposed to be devoted and connected to Hashem, that it's such an important factor in our life. That's why I think food specifically, and if you want to go more particular about food, what am I eating? So the whole idea of brachas, of stopping for a second and saying 1 second. This is not just self-understood factor that I'm able to eat, that I have what to eat. What am I eating? Am I eating a fruit, boire priya eitz? Am I eating a vegetable, boire priya adomo? Is this something that I'm eating the first time this year? And then I'm able to thank Hashem and say, oh wow, Shechyanu v'kimon v'gyanu lizman hazeh. Thank you for being able to actually reach this specific time that I'm able to be so grateful, not just for the fruit, but the fact that here I am living once again the yearly cycle of exposing the food. It's something that really brings us to this day-to-day awareness. So it's not, just once in a lifetime, once a week, once a day. It's something that we do so regularly, and this really is able to connect us and bring us to this day-to-day awareness of us and Hashem, and us and our relationship towards Hashem. So that's on one side. On the other hand, we know that it's brought down. It's already brought down in the Gemara. It's brought down in Chassidus and Kabbalah that food has an effect on a person, has an effect on a personality, on behavior, and certain foods that Hashem told us are good for both our body and our soul and for our neshama. And being that we really believe that our neshama has very, very clear the word like rules, like a rule book. What's the best thing for our neshama? We believe very, very strongly that part of the ruling and part of the instruction, like the instruction book, is for your neshama. This food could really fit with your neshama. Just for an example, the Zelle brings down in Parshas Mishpatim, brings down the whole idea of not eating meat and milk together, basar b'chalav. And the Zelle really goes into the whole idea, the whole root. The basar meat comes from the world of gevura, and the chalav comes from the world of chesed, kindness, and mixing them together. And he gets into a whole explanation, really explaining why basar b'chalav has not a good effect on our neshama. Neshama has to have times for chesed and gevura, and he explains the whole exact details. Meaning, as I said before, the neshama was created by Hashem, and there's an instruction book. And these type of foods are good for our neshama, and some other types of foods are not good for the neshama. So just to conclude everything I said, there's two sides to it. One side for it is the awareness and the ongoing connection that we have to Hashem. Let's stop and see, is this connecting me to Hashem, or is this Hashem doing the opposite? Is this something that's Hashem's will in this world, or the Hashem the opposite? And it specifically said regarding something that happens so casual like food. And on the other hand, it's just the deeper connection, which is these instructions, these spiritual instructions of how to activate our neshama and have the neshama influence ourselves, our surroundings in the best way, based on these rules of kashrus.
That's really helpful, because when you think of Shabbos, which maybe is another very big part of our Yiddishkeit, that happens once a week. This is something that happens all the time, and it's always another opportunity to practice our Yiddishkeit and to connect to Hashem. So something interesting with kashrus, which does exist in other mitzvahs as well, is that there's this idea of almost levels within it. Because if you ask a frum girl, do you care about keeping kosher? She'd say, of course. Like, it's not a question. I'm going to eat kosher. When you go into the details of different hechsherim and the levels of what that means, is it kosher? Is it not kosher? And it's kosher, but it's not that kosher. That's where things maybe start to get a bit more complicated, especially as girls are figuring out, what their standards are and what that means for me to keep kosher and what my red lines are. So I would love to hear from you if you're able to give us a bit of a background in this concept of hechsherim, because I'd really love to get into that. Where does the concept of a hechsher come from?
Okay, let's start with the word kosher. Kosher means good, it means approved, it means legitimate. Okay, kosher is not just with food. You have a kosher mikveh and a kosher eruv, and just the word kosher just means good, approved, right. That's the word kosher. Now, I would like, let's say, if we make the comparison between, let's say, physical well-being and spiritual well-being. Also, when it comes to physical, you have sometimes you could have some nash that if you would ask any doctor that understands a little bit in anything that has to do with nutrition, he'll tell you, oh, givald, it's really not good. So you could have a little bit of it. You could compromise a little bit about some people that are allergic to certain type of ingredients. If it's a little bit of it, they could have. Not a little bit of it, they could have. That's on a physical matter. Now you have food that could be, you can have some people that could be extra healthy and extra organic and extra, today you have all these terms and everything, they only have spelt and no white flour and no white sugar. Well, once in a while, I could have a little bit here and a little bit there. Um, and just like when it comes to a physical type of relationship that I have with my food, I could also have a spiritual relationship with my with my food. And the same thing is here. In other words, you could have kosher, which is, as I was saying before, there's just like I have different levels in physical food and different levels of health food and different levels of allergies and all kinds of other in other things. I also have different levels in terms of kashrus. So if I really believe that kashrus, as I was saying before, are a certain type of an instruction book that's good for my soul, for my neshama, I also have an instruction book that's also good for my physical body. Now, you could choose how much of this instruction book you would like to practice physically, and you can also choose how much of this instruction book would you like to practice on your spiritual level. There are some things that are general. If you want, I could speak more in details about that in a second. Of like, what's a better kashrus or less of a better kashrus. Um, but you could choose. Do I want to go on the minimum kashrus, which means it's for sure not treif, just like I could eat minimum type of food as long as it's not like very extreme, not harmful or not poison, yeah. But then there's many levels. There's some people that are very into their healthy food and to their healthy menu. That certain foods that us people would be eating, they would pass out just thinking about it, right? But nevertheless, our body is able to handle it. But and then between their level of, as I was saying, all kinds of whole wheat organic situations compared to what we eat, there's a very big spectrum. Same thing is about kashrus. Some kashrus means that it's not treif, for whatever the reasons are. And sometimes kashrus will mean, no, it's actually not just that it's not treif, it's actually really kosher. Okay? And it's just like, as I said, just like it is in a physical world, it could also be in the spiritual world.
So I've heard this a lot. I've said it myself before when trying to figure out this whole landscape of Hechsherim. Sometimes it gets confusing, and the response is, okay, but like, is it kosher? Like, okay, it's kosher. And
Well,
so what would your
so
response be
let's
to
flip
that?
the coin. Is it healthy? Is it edible? Is it dangerous? Where's the level? So could I eat it or can I eat it? I'm sure, once in a while you meet these people that whenever you pull out like some kind of a, I don't know, some kind of a candy, they close their eyes, they get like really holy, and they start telling you all the awful disasters that you have in this type of candy, right? How could you feed it to
Right.
your children? Don't you know that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? They eat 26 and they eat 27, and say there some people get there. So is it healthy or not? It's not healthy. Is it poison? No, it's not poison. So where is it? Somewhere in between. So I think it's the
Mm.
exact same thing. In other words, you have to choose for yourselves. Where's your line? Now I want to say something about kashrus, and maybe it's a little bit to continue what I was saying before. I think a very very important idea of kashrus, besides the 2 points that I said before, the fact that it's a spiritual reason and the fact that it's the awareness of Hashem. There's something about kashrus. There is about other things, but I feel about kashrus more than anything else that there's a certain type of ongoing self-test, right? A way to indicate myself, how devoted I am to whatever level I decide I want to be at. For an example, someone decided that he wants to keep Chol Yisrael. He wants to keep Chol Yisrael, and he's really strong about it because he knows that after all, Chol Yisrael is so much um, is a much higher level and well supervised. And according to many opinions, it's even a halacha, not just a chumrah, right? Somebody decides Chol Yisrael, and that's a decision that he made between himself. It could be in his family, it could be with his mashgiach, whatever. That's a decision he made. Then he comes and he shows up by some ice cream shop, and there's this big fancy piece of ice cream or ice cream, a cake or some kind of a fancy cream cake, right? And now my question is like this: am I going to really bow down to this ice cream, to this type of cake, and give up my morals, my beliefs, my standards that I chose for myself? Am I really going to give into this thing? In other words, a lot of times these idea of kasha, especially when it happens on such a casual thing. That's sort of casual because in the end, everybody has to eat at least a few times a day. So every single time that I have, it's a certain time of way of indicating, of testing myself. Do I really live up to my morals, to my decisions? Am I really within the framework that I chose for myself? No, it's kashrus is not something that I could just, as I'm going on, I'm choosing my standard. It's something that I have to sit down and I have to decide. Is this my standard? Is my standard going to be Chol Yisrael, Pas Yisrael? Is my standard going to be Shemitah this way? Is my standard going to be, I don't know, Yashon, Chadosh? Anybody makes up their standard. And it's something that, you always build up. You always, decide and you build up. And after I decide the standard, then I go out to the restaurant. It's not something that I choose as I'm going on. Right? All right, this salad I'll go on this standard, and then this soup I'll go on this standard, and this meat I'll go on this standard, and this dessert I'll go on a different standard. It's something that you have to really choose for yourself. It's a framework that you have to set for yourself. And then you have to decide, am I really going to live up to the standard? And this is some kind of a if you wish, a test, yeah, a way to indicate where am I holding in this whole situation. Um, and that's what's going back to what you're asking. Is this kosher? Yes or no? You decide. You'll decide for yourself. I always tell my children, my students, I say, you don't ask a rabbi, hey, rabbi, which spiritual standard do I want to be? You ask the rabbi, I want to be at this and this standard. Now, am I on the way? Am I on the direction? Is this something I really should choose for myself? I shouldn't choose for myself. You don't ask him, oh, what standard should I be? You could say, what's a good idea? I want to be a God-fearing Jew. I want to be Lubavitch. I want to be Yeshivish, whatever it is. Do I living up to this standard? Should I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? But you have to first set for yourself what is your standard that's really important for you that you want to live up to. That's why a lot of times with kashrus, a lot of times when it comes to kashrus, I really believe that it's important to keep kosher. That goes without saying. I believe that it's important to keep a decent level of kashrus. If you want, we'll talk about that in a second. However, one of the greatest things that a person should do for himself, and this could happen on different levels. It could be annually, once a year. It could be once in a period of time. I start a new program. It could be when somebody gets married. Is really deciding to yourself before, what is my standard? What is my standard? And not saying, oh, as I'm eating, I'll just set my standard as I'm going on. That doesn't work that way. So you have to decide, what's my standard? My standard Chol Yisrael? Great. So my standard Chol Yisrael should really be able to, I should be able to live up to the standard regardless. What are they serving? Regardless to which surroundings am I around? Regardless to my family? That's my standard, yeah? I can't just choose my kashrus as I'm going on. Now, how often should you make these decisions? That's really up to you. You'll decide. Is this going to be the special hiddur mitzvah that you accept before Rosh Hashanah? Is this going to be something I'll accept when I get married and we work it out, husband and wife? Is this something that I should set to myself, every year, Yud Kislev? These are things that some has to decide. And from there, start living up to your kashrus standard and not doing the opposites.
That's a very helpful lesson just in life in general. Having our standards set before we actually go into the situation, not just with kashrus.
Yeah, I think it's a good tip in many things, but kashrus for sure.
For sure. Again, because you mentioned it comes up all the time. We're confronted with kashrus decisions every single day, basically. So I'll tell you the challenge that I've noticed comes up with kashrus in this area over others. When it comes to, let's say, setting our standard for Shabbos, we have things to fall back on in terms of, what does my family do? What makes sense to me? What's in the spirit of Shabbos, even if it's not breaking Shabbos? I kind of, maybe it makes sense to me that swimming, even if there's ways around, is not in the spirit of Shabbos. When it comes to kashrus, it's very hard for us to know unless we really take a deep dive what the different levels actually mean. We have this interesting thing where we need to choose and decide what our standard is with it without necessarily fully understanding what the difference between levels and standards are. So what advice would you have? What advice would you have for that?
So once again, let's make this very clear. When it comes to Hechsherim, just for beginners, a hechsher is divided to three things. It could be two or three things. I think we should do three things. It has to be a standard that they claim to live up to. A lot of Hechsherim give you a lot of promises, but it's not enough. A promise is not enough, and a statement is not enough. As I say, sometimes we especially in modern time and age when everything is like quick and here and now, people get a little bit addicted to headlines, statements, one-liners, a symbol, you have these gadgets, just press. Um, and hechsherim are not that. Hechsherim are people behind it, and a certain level of fact that I rely on people, that I trust people, that I believe people. So there's one level which is the standard that they claim to be. Another level is, do they really live up to the standard? And the third level, which puts it together, is, do I really trust them to live up to this level? Okay, and you need these three things. Now, some hechsherim are considered very, very reliable hechsherim. Reliable hechsherim means that they have a good repetition. I'm not saying that they are angels. They make mistakes just like everybody else, but they live up to it, and they try, and they try their best. And they have a very, very, very good repetition and a very good name, and they really put a lot of effort. And as I said, for years and years of experience, you could trust them. And then behind these hechsherim, there's people that are trustworthy. If we're talking about Badatz Yerushalayim, Badatz Edach Yerushalayim, they have this thing that when you want to eat their hechsher, it's not just the food that you eat. Sometimes you go to a restaurant and the food is really super duper kosher. However, you sit there in a restaurant and there's non-Jewish music playing in the background, and you say to yourself, all right, Mehadrin food, what I put in my mouth is Mehadrin. How about what I'm putting in my eyes? How about what I'm putting in my ears? How about the environment? Is this really music that I would want my family, myself, my neshama to be exposed to? And the badats are not just strict about the food, they're also strict about the environment. So you want to say, don't tell me what to do. Okay, that's your choice if you listen to music or not. But I will not give a stamp and based on my stamp, allow people that are living up to this standard to come in and be exposed to things that, yes, the food is kosher, but not the environment. So that's like but that's like really take it very, very far. Is that serious? It's extra serious. You're going to say, oh, what are they mixing in my life? They're not mixing in your life. They're just allowing you to live up to your standard that you chose. Same thing as when it comes to you have these yogurts, these puddings, these yogurts that you have to like split them. But that will not allow them to have cross wordings that when you open it, you cut the letter on Shabbos. Why? They make everyone individually packed. Why? Because when I am coming to experience this food, it's not just the food that I'm eating, it's the process of not being Mechal Shabbos, okay, through whatever they're doing. So, but that's, for example, it's considered a very, very high standard hechsher. I'm not going to tell you no problems at all, but for sure they're in a very, very high standard that cares and has a lot of experience. When I see a Badatz hechsher, I know that Badatz Yerushalayim, I know this is a good, reliable hechsher. Rabbi Lando in Bnei Brak is amazing. Also, it's a hechsher that runs for dozens and dozens of years. We know it's a hechsher, it's very, very reliable. We know his standard is high. The people live up to the standard. It's trustworthy. Rabbi Lando's hechsher is a very serious hechsher. Some places you really have to call and you have to check it out before. And it's not so weird. It's not something you do as you're going on. As I was saying before, it's not something you go to a hospital. Say, okay, I need some kind of a medical checkup. Okay, let's see what could work. Maybe I'll go to this doctor. Maybe I'll choose this doctor. Maybe as you're going on. No, it's something that's medical. You care about. You check before. You get your recommendations. You get whatever people have to say. You do your research, and then you choose which doctor should go based on your standard. Some doctors are good for your standard because of their personality, because of their approach, because of their perspective, because of their whatever it is. You choose what's important for you. It could be one doctor will be good for you because what you believe in. It could be another doctor will be something for something else, something you work on before, and you decide your standard based on that, based on recommendation, based on research, whatever it is. You go to this specific doctor. Same exact thing when it comes to vacation. You decide you want to go on vacation. You decide before which vacation, what type of vacation. Is a vacation in a desert area? Is it I don't know, ocean side? What type of hotel? You make your research, you do your thing, and then you go. You don't go to vacation, and as you're going with your suitcase, say, okay, maybe I should choose a room with a porch, without a porch, upstairs, downstairs. Something you decide before if you're serious about it and you care about it. So you decide before what is your standard you're looking for, and then is this really going to live up to this standard? And obviously, if it's some kind of an agent that organized a vacation and it was a total disaster, you'll never use them again because they don't have a name, and you'll make sure to notify everybody on Booking.com that it's a lousy agent, right? So hechsherim are exactly the same thing, and then hechsherim is a company that is supposed to give you a service, us, a service that's supposed to be a reliable service, supervising service. That's what it's all about. It's not a stamp, it's not a name, it's not a symbol, it's not a saying. It's a company that's supposed to be reliable in our eyes, living up to our standard, and allowing us to really live up to this hechsher. So that's in terms of the good hechsherim, the ones that we really, really trust. The other hand is that whenever it comes to a hechsher, we have to really make sure to ask the right questions, like just like you do research about any other thing, So ask the right questions. And again, what are the questions? You don't ask somebody, excuse me, where do I want to go to? You ask him, I want to go to so and so. Am I on the right direction? Am I on the right path? Right. Same thing with hechsherim. If you know, for an example, that it's important for you, is there a mashgiach regularly? How often does a mashgiach come? Sometimes you call up. I once read a little bit uncomfortable, but that was a story. I went to a restaurant and I walked in and I said, "Excuse me, who's the mashgiach?" And they said, "Mashgiach who?" Yeah, so I realized this is not a place that I would like to rely on. I called up the hashgacha. He says, "Yeah, once in a while we come, we check. If the supervisor doesn't know that there's a mashgiach there, then I know right away that the person is not serious." Next step, I come to the mashgiach. Now I have to decide what to ask the mashgiach. Ask him, is it kosher? Yes or no. If there's a mashgiach, it's probably not treif. Probably, right? But then I ask the mashgiach, let me ask you, is this chol Yisrael? If it's important for me, is it chol Yisrael? Yes or no? Is it pas Yisrael? Yes or no? Is it glad kosher? If it's glad fleshik, yes or no? These are questions I have to decide for myself. What if it's a Shemitah year in Israel? So Shemitah has different standards and levels. You have to decide for yourself what is a standard, what's a level, and go and ask the Mashgiach whatever 4 or 5 questions. You can ask Mashgiach, how often are you here? Yeah, who do you trust in the kitchen? Is it Pas Yisrael, Chol Yisrael, Bishul Yisrael, Glat, whatever it is? And that's enough. Believe me, 4 or 5 questions that you just whip out, you'll see from the way he answers that he usually will be very, very proud to show what his standard is. Or sometimes I'll tell you, dude, for what they pay me, I'm supposed to. I would never make a living off this thing. I have to check 30 different restaurants in one morning. It's minimum. He'll tell you, hopefully, honestly, and then we do trust people. Now, one more point. People say, well, we didn't used to have hashgachas 3 generations ago. We used to eat by each other, and whatever. And then you're right. It's trustworthy between people. So why is it that 3 generations ago we trusted everybody and we ate by each other, and today became more complicated? I think there's a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is that 3 generations ago, my grandmother, your grandmother, my great grandmother, your great grandmother, when they had to eat out of their house, they usually ate in a radius of 10 miles. That means anything that they had to eat was in a radius, and I'm exaggerating, 10 miles, right? They got their chickens from their backyard, and they got the vegetables from down the block, and they got the eggs from across the street, and that was it. That was it. It was very simple life. Everything was farming. Everything was very close. The sheikhet was the guy that you knew from shul, and you know what I mean. And the baidik was the guy that you knew from the shop, and the same butcher was the same butcher that her grandmother ate by, and the great great grandmother, and everything was very small and everything was very simple. Now, part of the industrial revolution, for good and for better, by the way, is the fact that everything became an industry. Food became an industry. Yeah, food became an industry. Hechsherim became an industry. Everything became an industry. And part of this industry is the fact that things are much wider. If you just make a test for yourself, just for the fun of it, sit down by your dinner table, by your supper table, or by your breakfast table, and think to yourselves, how many miles, did your food travel today? Did you travel in order for it to come to your table? How many ingredients were manufactured, not just as a simple ingredient of having an egg that I bought from my farm next to me, or a thing that I, some kind of a cucumber or a onion that I picked from my backyard. How many food that I have, because it's an industry, it's a real industry. There's a thing called food engineers. They sit and they engineer your food, and they put so many ingredients. Look at the ingredients. They could be dozens, sometimes could be more than dozens, could be hundreds of ingredients and sub-ingredients and sub. And this thing is imported from the Far East, and this thing is imported from America. And 90% of the wheat in Israel is imported from Australia. And now go figure that one out. Yeah? Go figure that one out. And that's what makes things so complicated. And just like food became an industry, and just like you have certain people that's their expertise of being engineers, that they engineer the food and they know how to connect the food and how to put it together. You have to have people that are in the industry, in the food, and they know how to really know where's this ingredient coming from, where's that ingredient from, this sub-ingredient, actually comes from wine. Wine is yain nesech. This didn't used to be 2, 3, 4, 5 generations ago. And today, everything is so much more, life is more complex. It's really, they say it's more simple, but it really isn't. In order to make it simple, it has to be more complex. And food became more complex, and therefore hechsherim became so much more complex.
Wow, that's a really helpful way of seeing it. And I really appreciate how you said at the beginning that at the end of the day, hechsher is people behind it. And what you were saying is that before, we would just, I guess even when you were saying that there's the top standard of Hechsherim, like Eidach Haredis, where you don't really have to ask too many questions. They have the reputation of caring about the whole experience. And then there's ones where you have to ask questions. And I was thinking that probably the same thing existed generations ago as well, that there were maybe certain people in the community who lived a certain standard of life, not just with their kashrus, who represented a certain spiritual status, that if they invited you to their house, you'd say, I'm coming. And then maybe there'd be certain people that if they invited you to their house, you would ask them a few questions beforehand, even then, because of just the standard that they represent, not just in kashrus, but just in their life. Then you start to ask questions. Um,
Well,
it
100%. I want to say something. Even in the Gemara already, all right? In the Gemara we see, um, in the Gemara we see that there's a concept called a chaver. Chaver means a friend. And there used to be a certain type of group of chaverim, of friends, that they would trust each other. And some people know there's a thing called the Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz today means illiterate. That's not really mean. Am Haaretz means a simple person, one of the Aretz, one of the people. And you had chaverim. And if you were trustworthy, you were called a chaver. And chaverim ate by each other, and they did not eat by an Am Haaretz. In other words, there was a certain level that you knew between each other we could trust, and a certain level that we can't trust.
Mhm.
And I think that's where it begins in the Gemara. So to come and say that it's a new thing today, kashrus, whatever, we all trusted each other. It's not true in the time of the Gemara. Gemara, just to remind each other, was written 1800 years ago, 1900 years ago. Mishnah, Gemara, yeah. So if I already have a concept called the chaver from 1900 years ago, 2000 years ago, so for sure today when things became so much more complicated, so much more detailed, somebody says, "What? You don't know what I'm serving you?" Let me tell you a small secret. Most people don't know themselves what they're serving you when it comes to the ingredients. They're serving you a product that they bought in the store, and they bought it and it has an OU on it, or maybe it doesn't have all hechsherim, it doesn't have anything. And they say, "What, you don't trust me?" I said, "I trust you. You don't trust yourself. You yourself don't always know what you're serving me. Look at all the different ingredients that are in there. You know how to read these ingredients?" And sometimes people say, "Well, I just know how to read the ingredients. I can tell you if it's kosher or not." Oh, really? Maybe start translating what are these ingredients that you have in there. Most people can't even translate past the third or fourth ingredient. They have no idea, unless that's what they do for a living. Either they do it in a living for the food industry, or they do for a living for kashrus industry.
Mhm. I'd love to go back for a minute to those questions to kind of hone them in so we can have it clear in our mind because I've never called up a Mashgiach. I just have, I really do rely on Hechsherim, and now this has really it's opened something up for me. I guess my husband has a few times, but I never did when I was single ever. It was like, okay, it says kosher, or okay, it's the hechsher that I eat. So for someone who wants to feel equipped to actually pick up the phone, call that number, speak to the mashgiach, um, you said that we should find out, first of all, how serious the mashgiach sounds in his own job and how often he's actually showing up. For a girl who wants to keep, what we would call a Mehadrin standard that includes Pas Yisrael, Chalav Yisrael, levels of shmita, like that's taking it seriously, doesn't want to eat arla chas v'shalom, things like that. What are some good questions they should have in the back of their mind to be able to just whip out when they get on the phone?
Um, okay, first of all, if it's a good hechsher, I'm serious. You don't have to start calling mashgichim every time you see a good hechsher. Okay,
Okay.
so these things change, but there are the top, the top five, and again it depends where. I don't think somebody goes on Kingston Avenue and sees Crown Heights Hechsher starts asking his mashgiach. Crown Heights
Right.
Hechsher is considered a good hechsher. I mean, I believe an okay hechsher. The reliable hechsherim that we all grew up under their inspiration. That's around the world. If it comes in Israel, I believe that a hechsher. I'm saying in general, yeah. If it comes to a badatz Eido Charedis is a good hechsher. Lando is a good hechsher. I don't have to call the Mashgiach Rabbi Lando in every falafel shop in Bnei Brak.
Are there other hechsher other than those two?
Now I'll tell you a good tip. If it's a Mehadrin hechsher, the word Mehadrin is very confusing. But if it's a Mehadrin hechsher, under and whoever is signed on the Mehadrin is a Lubavitcher Rav or a Rav that we know that he's a. I'm saying Lubavitch because that's something that we between ourselves a lot of people know, but not necessarily. It could be anybody that's a rabbi that's considered a serious rabbi, a serious hechsher. Mehadrin Yerushalayim. Mehadrin Yerushalayim is a serious rabbi standing behind Mehadrin Yerushalayim. And something in such a case, you don't even have to call. What happens when I have like this random, I end up in some random place, yeah, and I see a hechsher, and I've never heard about the rabbi, I've never heard about the hechsher. So say there, I don't think it's something that's scary. You look at the thing. What's the number of the Mashgiach? You call up. You say, "Excuse me, sir, are you the Mashgiach and so and so?" He says, "Yes." Are you there very often? He says, "I'm there every single day." It's very important that some Mashgiachim only come, once a day. Some come once a week. As long as the system. You ask him, "How often do you come?" Could I ask you how often do you come? Now you have to decide what to ask him. I'm back again to my case. In other words, what is important for you? You don't say, "Oh, you tell me what's important for me." He can't tell you what's important for you because he doesn't know what you want. Right. You have to decide. Make up your standard. What's important for me? Important for me that it should be Pas Yisrael. Pas Yisrael. Important for me that it should be Bishul Yisrael. Bishul Yisrael. Important. You can hear from Mashgiach that he knows. Say, "Excuse me, sir, is it really Bishul Yisrael that there's really a Yid on a daily basis that turns on the fire?" That's a good question because I turn it on once a week. There are shittas that it's okay, but it's for sure not a Mehadrin standard. Tells you, well, I'm there every single day. All these questions, every one of these questions, you could have a series of shiurim on them. Yeah, what's Bishul Yisrael? Is Bishul Yisrael this shitta, that shitta? Is it Arla, which is Batul Beroiv or Batul in 200? Is it Trumas Umaisris? Is it Schmidt? I'm saying in general, you have to decide what are your standards. Sit down, think to yourself. It doesn't take a very, very long time. I like to believe that most people have some kind and if not, it's a really, really good idea to have a Rav, a Mashpia, a Paisek, and some guidance, some kind of someone that could guide you, at least help you find your way within this framework called kosher Mehadrin. And based on that, you call up and you ask the questions. As I said, 4 or 5 questions, you already see what direction are we going. A lot of times you don't even have to call a Mashgiach. If you, for example, see Mehadrin of some random place, you call the local shliach. We're very, very lucky and fortunate. We have shluchim everywhere. You call up and say, "Hey, I could tell you next to my town, I live in Kfar Vradim. I don't give Hechsherim. That's why I'm such a popular rabbi here in town, because I don't like getting into fights with people. But I have the regional rabbi here gives the Hechsherim for everybody. So, people are going to call me and say, the regional rabbi, do you trust him? I could say anything that's under the word Mehadrin of this regional rabbi, you could trust 100%. Why? Because I know the guy is absolutely crazy. I know that in order for him to get the Mehadrin, he wants every single shit that should be in Mehadrin for Mehadrin. So anything that's Mehadrin under this local the regional rabbi around my area, you could trust. So they could call me, for an example, and say, "Do you trust this and this hechsher?" If I have a rabbanut in some random place, Baruch Hashem, there's shluchim almost everywhere. You call them up and say, "If I have this name under the rabbanut, is this good for my standard being that Yeshivish, Chol Yisrael, Lubavitch, whatever?" Everybody could use their term, right? And the local shliach, the local rabbi, could tell you, could I trust the hechsher? I cannot trust the hechsher. Once again, as you were saying before, it's human beings, it's people. We all know somewhere or another, people know each other, and I think that's probably the best way. So, just to conclude, if it's a really good hechsher, you don't need any questions. If it's a Mehadrin of a serious hechsher, Mehadrin Yerushalayim, Mehadrin Tzfas is amazing. If it's Badatz Yerushalayim, if it's Lando, I'm saying in Israel, right? So these hechsherim are good. If it's a hechsher that says Mehadrin doesn't always mean that it's really Mehadrin, and on the bottom is signed the name of a rabbi. If it's someone that you know that is a serious rabbi, so you don't even have to call. And if it's someone that you don't know, you call the local shliach, you call the local rabbi or someone that you know, and you say, "Excuse me, do you know about this and this hechsher?" The answer will either be yes or no.
So you mentioned Mehadrin Yerushalayim, not Badatz, but like the Mehadrin Yerushalayim of Jerusalem, and that I heard you say it's pretty good hechsher. Every city, from what I've noticed, or almost every city, has like almost their Mehadrin of that city, just like Mehadrin Yerushalayim, like Mehadrin of Netanya, Mehadrin of even Tel Aviv. Is that relevant for every city, that if it's the Mehadrin of the city, we can...
No. Very, very good question. I want to say something. In order for there to be kosher, the only one that could actually authorize the word kosher and give you a certificate is only if he's a official rabbi in Israel. Okay, not everyone. If you write the word kosher and give out a certificate, you could literally, it's illegal in Israel. Okay, the
Oh,
word
wow.
kosher can only be certified by a active rabbi serving in Israel. Okay, that's the way it works. Look at, for example, the word badatz. Badatz Yerushalayim Edo Cheredis, which is holy and Mehadrin. The word kosher doesn't appear there. Check it out. It says behashgachas, under the supervision of. Even they can't use the word kosher because they're not official rabbis in Israel.
Really?
So that's for good and for better. The word kosher, now kosher means that it's for sure not treif. The word Mehadrin, any rabbi could decide what will be his standard for Mehadrin. And
Wow.
that's why the word Mehadrin doesn't necessarily mean that it's perfectly okay. Mehadrin is a very, very tricky word that people could do whatever they want. The word Mehadrin comes from, the word Mehadrin actually comes from Hanukkah. I mean, they just use a beautiful word because Mehadrin comes from the word beauty, an extra beautiful Mehadrin. Mina Mehadrin, they just use the word as a term. So if it's Mehadrin under a serious rabbi, you can know that it's really a good standard and a good hechsher, like Mehadrin Yerushalayim, for example. But not every Mehadrin is really is Mehadrin the way that we were calling Mehadrin. It's just a little bit tricky.
Wow.
I don't want to start going through a whole list right now. Things also sometimes change, and different companies and different products, and what's. So I don't think this is the time or place to start saying. I can tell you for a fact, Mehadrin Yerushalayim is a good hechsher. Mehadrin Tzfas is amazing, not even good. It's amazing. Okay, I can tell you that I can tell you, as I said, Badat Yerushalayim, Lando, these are good hechsherim,
Mhm.
are up there, yeah, are up there. All the other hechsherim, you just, as I said, ask your local rabbi, ask your
Mhm.
mashgiach, ask your halachic authority, and as I said before, and I'll say a million other times, and if you don't have one, it's time to get one. It's just going to be good for you, just in general in life. It could be a really good thing, and
Mm.
uh, and they will help you find your way.
That is really interesting because I've always thought of it as the opposite, and I've heard a lot of people who are not familiar in Israel say it said Mehadrin. Kosher, we're like, oh, it's a kosher. What does kosher mean? But if it says Mehadrin, then okay, it's got like a stamp. But you're saying it's almost the opposite, that if it says kosher, there's like almost a legality behind it. There is some sort of rabbi. It's for sure not treif. If it says Mehadrin,
Yeah.
do some research over there.
But as I said, imagine anybody could choose their standard. Imagine some people will decide on Shemitah that what we call the lenient way of Shemitah for them is considered Hider. You understand?
Ah, okay.
Um, for example, we don't go by Heter Mechira, that you sell the land on Shemitah year and you work regularly.
Hmm.
Why don't we do it? Because it's not very serious, whatever the reasons are. So we hold that it's not serious. So what do we do on Shemitah? We take crops from non-Jews. So comes a different rabbi and says, one second, you want to tell me that buying crops and supporting Arabs, that is called Mehadrin, and finding a legitimate way of selling your land just like I do on Mechiras Chometz is not Mehadrin. So this is already an argument between rabbis that, as I said before, we can make a whole series of classes just about Shemitah,
Hmm.
but not you know what I'm saying? But so the word Mehadrin could be very flexible and it could
Mm.
change a lot. But the word kosher is for sure not treif. Not treif doesn't mean that it's a standard that us people will be using, but that's a different thing.
Okay, that's really helpful. So Mahadran is almost like a subjective Mahadran. Uh,
Yeah, but it's subjective. It could be objective if it's somebody that's reliable.
uh-huh. Okay, that's really helpful. I'll end off with this question because I know that this comes up a lot when girls leave home, especially when they're in Eretz Yisrael, they're going to a lot of different people's houses to eat,
Hmm.
and it can cause a lot of uncomfortable things because it's a intimate kind of question. What's your hechsher? Are you kosher? What advice do you have for that for girls who are going to different families all the time, who do want to take their kashrus seriously, but suddenly it's not just one restaurant with one hechsher and one mashgiach to call, but it's a family and there's a person there and maybe it's uncomfortable. What advice do you have for that?
It's a very, very good question. Let's start like this. Usually, the best way to prevent a lack of comfort is to avoid it. In other words, what I'm saying is, um, you first have to decide where your standard is. I can tell you that again, you have to ask your halachic authority or your mashpia what should be a standard. A lot of times, they're going to tell you that really setting a permanent standard should be only after getting married,
Hmm.
because a lot of times being single you have to find some kind of flexibility in these certain things. So obviously you could decide how flexible you want to go, but I think that some standards should only be set after you're much more settled and permanent. By the way, even after you're married, you still always have different standards that you develop as as life goes on for whatever the reasons are. It could be social, it could be upgrade in your Chassidish level, it could be hachlotas of Rosh Hashanah that you make every year, it could be your children coming back from yeshiva and explaining to you how fry their parents are. It could be many reasons. But in general, a permanent high standard I think should be set after you're much more settled. That's for beginners. However, you should have some kind of a standard of your own, which is obviously Chol Yisrael or Glat, Shchita. You'll decide whatever your decisions will be based on. And the best way, as I said, to prevent them is to avoid them. What does it mean to avoid them? If you know, for an example, you're supposed to go to a family, and you usually the family doesn't just randomly become a family. It's a family that you get recommendations. No, I'm saying not just something out of nowhere that you
Right.
come. So you could ask. It's usually a second cousin of your mother. So you ask your mother. Let me ask you. Do you know about their hechsher? Just for beginners. Just for beginners. I found it myself that if and it's a challah that I made many years ago. It's lubavitch shchita. So I found that if I tell them that I don't eat meat or chicken out of the house, out of my own house, it gives me a very wide leeway, of not getting into discomfort. If I have a standard of chol Yisrael, and I know this family doesn't keep chol Yisrael, I could tell them that I don't do milk, And a lot of people get very insulted when you tell them that I don't do non chol Yisrael. But if I tell them I'm lactose free, that's okay, yeah. If I tell them that I'm vegetarian, that's okay. So you have to find a very very comfortable way of doing it. Once again, you have to decide what's your standard. If my standard is chol Yisrael, and my mother recommends on her relative, or my father recommends on his relative, I know these people don't keep chol Yisrael, so I try to avoid it. Either I don't go, or I tell them in advance, I keep chol Yisrael, so let's not do bilchiks, Or I know that I keep, chassidish shchita, knowing the sheikhet personally. We have different people that only eat the shchita of the sheikhet that they know personally. I could tell them to beginners, listen, I don't do meat out of my house. That's okay. So you keep vegetarian. If it's someone that you can trust, and as I said, you do your research before. You do your research before, and you know it's someone you don't trust. So try to avoid it. Just to be, as I said, for beginners, all these things of hechsherim. I think the main thing, what comes out from our talk, is you have to set your standard.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, just like any other thing in life, you have to have it planned. If you have your standard and you have your plan, so it fits into your standard. It just fits into your standard and it works out. You don't just go on vacation and say, oh, what am I going to eat today? No, think before. Is there anything kosher? Is it not kosher? Is it my standard, not my standard? You don't just randomly roll into someone's house on Shabbos unless you're stuck in a hitchhiking 5 minutes before Shabbos. But I'm saying, but you don't just roll into somebody's house casually and say, oh, by the way, I'm here, but could you please tell me what's your standard? It's just not. Somebody was telling me that they had the family that eats gebrachs on very frum family. Just they eat gebrachs on Pesach, yeah. And this girl showed up by them. She comes from a Hasidic background, and this girl told them, "Oh, as she sits down by the seder, yeah, right before they wash, she says, oh, by the way, I don't do gebrachs." And remember the woman telling me, oh, first of all, if you would have told me before, I would have organized something. Second of all, the gefilte fish has matzah meal in it, the knedlach has matzah meal in it, and the breaded chicken has matzah meal. What am I supposed to serve this nice girl? You know what I mean? So why can't you just plan things in advance? As I said, if somebody would be allergic to gluten, right? They would know how to ask before, is it gluten free? Is there any alternatives, anything? So if you set your standards and you have your right plan and you do your research a little bit before, it should be perfectly okay.
Just as if somebody's vegan, it would be very helpful as someone who hosts to know before. Because suddenly, like, oh, I'm vegan, what can I eat? It's like, oh, if you told me before, I wouldn't have put eggs in the challah. So, that is very helpful. And the big nuance and difference that Eretz Yisrael has to outside, so especially for girls coming from outside into Eretz Yisrael, which is fruit and vegetables, and the difference of the status that fruit and vegetables has in Eretz Yisrael and outside. And so I was wondering if you have anything that you'd like to just like share on that, a perspective.
Okay, I'll just say this. I once had a couple that came to speak to us here. They became Baal Tshuva in America probably 20 something years ago. And, they went through a whole process and In the beginning, I think they got involved through conservative, and they started keeping a little bit of kashrus, and then they got involved in Chabad, and they kept a higher standard of kashrus, and they had it all set. They had the whole system set. And then somebody told them that in Israel things are a drop different, and they came to speak to us. And I remember as I explained the whole situation, she looks at her husband. She says, "It's all over again. We have to start all over again."
It's
Yeah,
true.
it's like learning it all over again. Yes. So Israel is very, very different for a few reasons. Reason number one, we're very, very privileged, as the Rebbe writes in a letter. We're very, very lucky and privileged to sit in the royal palace, in the king's palace, and the way you behave, having a casual sandwich, is not the same way that you behave sitting in a palace of a king or a queen. And therefore, when you're privileged and lucky to be in Hashem's palace, Palterin Shel Melech, in Eretz Yisrael, you behave on a whole different level. That's for beginners. Besides that, Israel, if anywhere around the world you could have at least fruits and vegetables, you could have, well, unless they're imported from Israel, but fruits and vegetables you could have just no problem at all. In Israel, we are very privileged to have an extra boundary. When every time there's a boundary, it's a mitzvah, which means a bind, an extra connection to Hashem, and that is the idea of vegetables that have to be meiser, and fruits that, besides it being meiser, also have to be arla. So I'll just give you a little tip about it. When it comes, obviously, if places you buy out of a regular chain, which is one of these Israeli chains, it could be Supersol, it could be Rami Levi. All these places are already meiser. Okay, so that's for beginners. If you buy regularly or just casual vegetables somewhere that's not an official place and doesn't have a kashrus certificate, so you should meiser yourself, and you can meiser yourself. It's not very complicated. It takes about, even if you're very, very slow, within 45 minutes you can get the system down, and you can learn how to meiser yourself. Usually meiser without a bracha anyways. You just meiser out of the vegetables, and you're good to go. When it comes to food, it's a little bit more complicated. Food has an issue of arlo, and you really should not be buying fruit without a good supervision of fruit, especially in Israel, unless it's imported. Today, a lot of food is imported. If you see it's imported, it's not a problem of arlo. But as I said, you're very lucky to be able to keep these mitzvahs, either trumas or meisris. As I said, if there's a chain, there's no problem. If there's a hechsher in the store, there's no problem. And if there isn't, you just meiser yourself. Very not complicated. That's in terms of that. Arla, if it's imported, no problem. And if not, you should really look for a good hechsher, because arla is a really major, it's a major issue, the idea of arla. Israel has a few other things. And one thing that we have in Israel is the fact that we are extra careful when it comes to bugs, when it comes to green leaves. The reason is because it's a warm environment, the way that they grow it, and there's extra ways of checking it or cleaning it, much more than you see around the world. Same as when it comes to rice and when it comes to flour. Flour, in Israel we sift, and the reason is because a lot of times the flour is imported from far places, a lot of times from the Far East, as I said before, from Australia. A lot of times it's ground and then it sits for a long time in whatever storage places it is, and because of the temperature, it develops bugs. And flour, you must sift the flour in Israel, not like in some other places which are either more fresh or cold, and therefore you not necessarily need to. In Israel, you must sift your flour. Same as when it comes to rice. In Israel, you have to check your rice, and the reason is, once again, the rice is imported from Far East. Sometimes it sits in certain temperatures in different storage places, and therefore the rice needs to be well checked. Okay, so fruits and vegetables, rice, and green leaves, and flour are a little bit different the way it is in Israel than it is around the world. And once again, look at it as a privilege of having. You're so lucky of being able to sit around the king's table, of sitting around in the promised Holy Land.
Chaim to that. Thank you so much. I think you've just simplified a very, for what a lot of people from out of Eretz Israel find to be a very complicated topic.
So,
So I really, really appreciate that. And thank
good,
you.
I'm happy.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of On Your Own. If you like this episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would love to connect with you. If you've got any questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, you can email me at onyourownpodcast@gmail.com. See you next week, and in the meantime, happy adulting.